would sure look that way. So I guess in the end, it made sense, despite their very narrow margin in the House. They did get it, and now they own it. It's theirs. There are no Democratic fingerprints on it. Whatever happens, happens politically to it. My guess is it's not going to get more popular.
Well, let's talk about that, and about exactly what it is that they own. Polling showed that a majority of Americans opposed the big beautiful bill before it passed, and but there's also evidence that a lot of Americans actually didn't know what was in the bill. And now Trump's allies seem to believe that there are enough front-loaded goodies in the bill, such as no tax on tips and this misleading promise of no tax on Social Security. We can talk about that in a minute. They think there are enough front-loaded goodies in there that they're going to be able to convince the public. What do you think about that? Is this sell job going to work, or do you think Democrats, opponents of the bill, can be effective in hanging
Well,
this bill
yeah.
around
Well,
Republicans'
if
necks?
I had to guess, I think it's going to be a little tougher for them. One is, it's a lot of the bill is just continuing the tax cuts that are in place now. So, for most people who pay income tax, they're not going to see any change. There are some front-loaded goodies, but there are a lot of the bad stuff kicks in pretty early. They weren't able to kick it past 2026 or 2028. So, people who are going to get thrown off Medicare, I mean Medicaid mostly, but also some cuts to Medicare that are serious. Lots of programs that are getting cut. I think that's going to get felt pretty quickly. But overall, the success of a bill like this also kind of rides on the economy. And if the economy remains strong, he may, not suffer that much politically. If the economy dips more, and we'll find out, then I think people's opinion of both the president and his signature bill will suffer.
Well, just on this point about the goodies, the timing of the Medicaid cuts is actually after the midterms for them to fully kick in. And by then, potentially, there could be Democrats in power. And I guess the kind of diabolical nature of how they've planned the timing of this bill is to make it seem like the Democrats could potentially own it if they're in control in 2027, when those come due. And then a lot of these goodies actually expire in 2028, right? Despite, I guess, did you get
Right.
this incredibly misleading email from the Social Security
The Social
Administration?
Security, right. Right.
Yeah.
It left the impression that you were no longer going to be taxed on benefits.
And that's just not true on a couple levels. Number one, it's not true that Social Security benefits are themselves exempt from federal income tax, right? All they did was expand the deduction to
Exactly.
$6,000 for individuals and $12,000 for married couples, which means that some chunk of seniors might have the ability to benefit from that, but it's not like all Social Security benefits are immediately
Right.
exempt.
Exactly.
So it's misleading in that way. And also, according to the Tax Policy Center, close to two-thirds of seniors already don't pay Social Security income taxes on their Social Security benefits because their incomes are too low. So
Right.
it's a lot of hot air, I
Yeah.
guess, for minimal benefit.
Yeah. No, no, exactly. I mean, the details of the Medicaid program better than I, but it seems to me there's also enormous amount of pressure on governors at the state level for all these 50 state versions. The COVID money's run out, the economies are tight here. In the mid-Atlantic, the District of Columbia, Maryland are expected to see some really big budget cuts. That's, I think, bound to affect the state contribution to Medicaid in these places. Maybe not. I assume it does, right, Ann?
Mhm. No, no, you're right. That's a good point. And the work requirements, work reporting requirements kicking in after the midterms, states are actually going to have to set up systems to prepare for that, to prepare for
Right.
compliance. And that's going to mean probably a lot of bad press around how much it's going to cost for states to come up with ways to make sure that people who are working are, in fact, just reporting their hours. That's how a lot of people are going to lose coverage, in fact. This will mean lots of money going to contractors, lots of concerns about the paperwork burden on people who are holding multiple jobs. So, yeah, you might be right that there's going to be a lot of attention paid to the intended and
Yeah.
unintended downstream consequences.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a tough year to be a governor.
Yeah. Um, so, as far as the substantive impacts of the bill long term, uh, there's a question about, what is the most politically salient as far as the midterms are concerned. But there are a lot of things in this bill also that really substantively change the nature of the American economy, the role of government, our fiscal health. What do you see as the most worrisome for American economic stability and competitiveness going forward as a consequence of this big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, well, it seals in, some of these Doge cuts that have been going on in terms of scientific research in other places, which I think has been a backbone of the American economy for 80 years. And there's been a bipartisan consensus to put, significant federal dollars into grant research that goes out through big research universities, and it's paid off in spades and everything from, high technology and especially in biomedicine and healthcare. So, with that getting cut back, I really do worry about that's long-term effects and competitiveness. Here in this mid-Atlantic area where the National Institutes of Health are taking really big cuts, really top research scientists are looking at London and Dubai and other places they're getting offers, or they're just, going to go to Whole Foods and hang out because they don't have offers. But either way, America is not going to benefit from their expertise the way we have been. And then, of course, there is the debt. Now, I have not been a super deficit hawk. I think I was in my youth, but less so in recent years as we've kind of, learned to live with expanding deficits. But these are really very big deficits, even bigger than the ones during the financial crisis and COVID. And this should have been the time with decent economic growth to try to get those down a bit. And I think there are limits to borrowing at a certain point, especially if there is some loss of confidence in buying American bonds. So I worry a lot about that too.
Mhm. I'm old enough to remember when people back in the 1990s, the Blue Dog Coalition of Democrats were concerned about the deficit, and that was, decades ago. We're adding 3.3
Seems quaint
trillion.
now. Yeah.
It doesn't it? Doesn't it? Doesn't
Yeah.
it? So, just one interesting factoid, the interest on the debt in 2025 will be $952 billion, which is more than what the federal government spent on Medicaid in 2024. The federal share was just $607 billion. And this $952 billion that we're spending on interest on the debt, which is going to creditors, mainly over half of whom are overseas, is more than what we spent on the US military in 2024, which was $883 billion. So the interest on a credit card is much higher
Yeah.
than ever before, and it's crowding out a lot of other spending.
Yeah. And the rates only seem poised to go up, not down.
Um, that's right. And Bill, I'd be curious to know what you think is going to be the most damaging substantive long-term impact of the big beautiful bill. There's, political things to hang around their necks in the short term, but as far as these vast dramatic changes that the one big beautiful bill is actually wreaking on our economic stability and competitiveness to come, just wondering what you worry about most.
Well, I mean, we're doing serious damage to our health insurance system, and to SNAP, and you might have already talked about that already. So that's going to put some pressure on Democrats. I mean, Democrats will now have to run on fixing this, and so they're gonna be probably obligated to say what they're going to reinstate, what they want to put money into, and to the extent that debt is an issue, and this is always tricky because we don't have agreed upon red lines. What is too much? It gets very fuzzy, and lots of people have sort of said it. Well, the GDP debt ratio has to be this. Then you cross it, and things seem to be okay. So we don't really know what the red line is, but we may be at a point where not only is it too much, it needs to be reined back in. If you then need to spend more money to reinstate things like Medicaid and SNAP, you have more pressure on articulating how you're going to pay for it. And if you can't it's easy to say tax the rich. That's the sort of the safe place to go. And Democrats have no problem making those arguments. But to the extent you have to then inch more into upper middle class, that gets politically dicier. And at what point do the Democrats have to be the party of good governance and take those hits and make those cases, or to what extent do they feel like, you know what, that's that goo-goo stuff is for wimps. We just got to be like Republicans and just give stuff away and not worry about how the numbers add up. I think those questions, those challenges, are going to put pressure on the Democrat coalition, or at least could in the near to midterm future.
And in the meantime, you've got these ridiculous $1,000 Trump accounts being established for babies over the next 4 years, only the next 4 years. And maybe something like that won't be big enough to override Democratic messaging around some of these larger concerns and things that are coming up. Maybe it will be. I mean,
well, it's something else that creates long-term pressures. Your Democrats will be hard pressed to say, let's cancel the Trump baby bonds. Tell you people are going to like having $1,000 put in their bank account when their baby is born. But the way Trump has it constructed, it's not very helpful because it's a one-time. And once the account's established, it's people in the upper classes that'll be more positioned to add to it, and so will likely add to wealth gap as it stands. So the pressures on Democrats to keep it but close the wealth gap, and that's more money. And then who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
So it's Democrats in my entire adult lifetime have spent when they get into power, they clean up Republican messes. This is going to create a lot of messes to clean up, and perhaps particularly pricey ones this time around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But without the resources that Obama and Clinton famously had, and Biden to a degree, they won't have the low interest rates. They won't have in some cases, the majorities that are needed. Probably the political will, a more divided Congress. So it's even it was tough then. It's going to be even tougher.
But hey, we're going to have all this new revenue from tariffs, right?
Well, that's true. Unless they're all unless we cut so many great deals.
Right, which brings us to the second topic I want to ask you guys about. Wednesday is supposedly the day that the 90-day emergency pause on the Liberation Day tariffs is lifted. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, has already said that people are going to get a reprieve until August 1. It actually is Taco Wednesday again. He promised 90 deals in 90 days. We have, 2.5 deals,
right.
kind of?
Yeah, sort of frameworks of discussions of, intimations.
Concepts of a framework of a plan.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, to the extent that we don't know what's going to stay in place. If high tariffs stay in place, they do at least partially offset some of these debt issues. They do bring in revenue. That might make things sort of easier for Democrats going forward, but it's not a tax system that anyone's going to like. I mean, if the tariffs don't really follow through and the tariff burden stays low and prices don't really go up, then people are going to go about their business. If Republicans said, we gave you all these tax cuts, but everything at the grocery store is more expensive, that's not going to make people happy. That's going to make the Democratic short-term political job a lot easier. And it's going to be easier for Democrats to say, we're going to get rid of these tariffs that are burdensome to you. But then again, then the next step is, here's what taxes we want to raise to offset the revenue that it brought in. And that's where things might get more complicated.
Yeah. And there could, Bill's right. I mean, there certainly could be some spike in revenue because you are raising taxes. On the other hand, there's bound to be layoffs too. Maybe as directly as stevedores unloading imports, or Subaru dealers trying to sell $65,000 Outbacks. I assume that's more than an Outback costs now. I think it is by a lot, but I haven't seen one lately. So it's it's hard to tell what its economic fallout. Nobody is really optimistic it's going to be very good, and certainly no one's I think, realistically optimistic that it's going to revive American manufacturing the way Trump claims.
Right. And let's not forget that tariffs are taxes and they tend to be regressive taxes. And they're going to fall, which means that they'll fall most heavily on Trump's base. People who spend a lot more of their income because their incomes are lower on stuff like clothing and small electronics that come
Yeah.
from China and the Southeast Asia. This framework of a deal, of a concept of a plan, or whatever it was that was agreed upon with Vietnam, for instance, the current framework calls for 40% tariffs on so-called transshipments, which means goods originating from a country like China and then going through Vietnam, and then a 20% tariff on goods from Vietnam overall. Both of which rates are much higher than what is tariffed currently, of course. I took a quick look at what the top exports are from Vietnam to us. A third of their GDP relies on exports to the United States, which is one reason why they had to come to the table. But we get an awful lot of clothes from Vietnam. The number one export to us is broadcasting equipment, like the microphones we're using perhaps for this podcast, the computers. So the hit is going to be pretty hard on consumers and on lower income consumers in particular.
And for businesses who are trying to plan and have some stability, a lot of them offshored from China to Vietnam precisely to avoid what they saw as the future of tariffs, mostly under a Trump, but also under Democrats too. And now they're getting hit on the Southeast Asia front. So that's tough to decide. Well, now that you're manufacturing in Vietnam, what do you do now? Do you just kind of ride out the tariffs? Do you try to find still another place? And of course, Trump has phrased this as a as a binary choice for consumers between American goods and foreign goods. Well, first of all, there are a lot of goods that can't be replaced by coffee, for instance. We grow less than 1% of our coffee domestically in Puerto Rico and Hawaii. So if you want to keep drinking coffee, that is going to have a big tax, and it is going to come from abroad. And as you said, with small electronics, there really isn't the manufacturing capacity here right now to do it. So you're going to have to buy from overseas. That's a tough road for a lot of consumers. And as you said, Ann, it's regressive.
And the bill, what's technically the act, because Schumer got one big beautiful bill struck from the title. It also ramps up the immigration crackdown, huge spending for ICE. And there's some question how well they can spend it, how quickly they can spend it. But to the extent that this is a multifaceted effort to nationalize the economy, both with higher tariffs and fewer immigrants in the workforce, almost every economist says this is not how a good economy can function. We are in a global economy. Things are interconnected. Supply chains are intermingled, and a healthy influx of immigrants helps with your workforce and helps keep costs down without, dragging down the salaries of workers who are already here, because immigrants are generally going into industries where they need the workers, and other existing Americans aren't competing for those jobs. So we could well have a lot of short-term economic calamity that will be easy for Democrats, not just to say this is bad, but to make a case that low tariffs and a healthy flow of immigrant labor is good, that it's good to be in an interconnected economy. It's good for our daily cost of living. It makes America stronger. This MAGA line that Trump sold you is false. So that part, I think, creates a lot of opportunity for Democrats, not just to win elections, but also just to make a broader case of what kind of world we want to live in. Where it gets harder is, okay, now where do we make up this revenue that Trump has lit all these dollars on fire?
Right. Well, let's talk about the extent to which immigration, which has been a political strong point for Trump and the Republicans so far, could become a liability. And another reason to bring this up is because not only is the administration dramatically ramping up its crackdown on migrants, and you're seeing videos every day of 13-year-olds being hauled away and children left on sidewalks, but now you've got the Supreme Court that's allowed the deportation of 8 men to South Sudan, a country that they have no connection to. And you have things like a new immigrant detention center that's opened up in Florida called Alligator Alcatraz. I actually have a clip I want to play you guys from, it's a partial clip from a video by the Florida Attorney General. And it's a little bit unbelievable in its tastelessness. And I'd love to get you guys' reaction about
square mile area is completely surrounded by the Everglades. Presents a efficient, low-cost opportunity to build a temporary detention facility because you don't need to invest that much in the perimeter. If people get out, there's not much waiting for them other than alligators and pythons. Nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Within just 30 to 60 days after we begin construction, it could be up and running and could house as many as 1,000 criminal aliens. This presents a great opportunity for the state of Florida to work with Miami-Dade and Collier counties. Alligator Alcatraz, we're ready to go.
Yeah. So that's a government video. So
Right.
what do you guys think?
Well, look, I think first of all, just as an intellectual matter, even if you thought that this was somehow a deterrent to people who have been willing to walk through jungles from South America, literally walk to the United States, you're talking about 1,000 beds. I don't think it's going to have a big deterrent effect on people who want to come here and those who are here to want to stay here. So I don't think it's going to work in that respect. It's just, I was never fond about the promiscuous use of, the cruelty is the point, but in this case, it's hard to avoid the cruelty is the point, right? I mean, this kind of Devil's Island, Alcatraz routine is just purely kind of sadistic, it seems to me. And, I'm sorry to see, so many politicians jumping on the bandwagon for this.
And we've definitely had a hard education at the politics of immigration. 10 years ago, almost everybody assumed that being favorable to immigration was the key to winning the Latino vote, and that has not proven correct in recent elections. But I think that Trump has gone away with embracing a hard line on immigration because many people were convinced that, well, he doesn't mean me, he doesn't mean my family, he doesn't mean my friends, he doesn't mean people that might be in my extended family who might come here because they want to get work. He means criminals, and so it's not going to affect me personally. And that's proving less and less true. And in Florida, of all places, which has a very diverse population, and it's not just Cuban, but also Venezuelan. If people end up in Alligator Alcatraz who are not hardened criminals, the backlash I think could still come. They're doing this stuff, the intent for deterrent effect. I think they realize that they'll even with the added money in the recent legislation, it's hard to do mass deportation with the person power ICE has. So they want the deterrent effect to make it easier on ICE. But there's a lot of risk for political backlash. We've already seen political backlash occur, and this only heightens the risk.
Well, border crossings are already at the lowest that they've been in years. And so there's no way to hit Trump's target of 3,000 arrests per day without a lot of mistakes being made, right? And people being sent to Alligator Alcatraz who should not be there at all. Not that anyone should be sent to Alligator Alcatraz, in my opinion, but
right.
Well, remember the border crossings got shut down on Biden's watch. Trump has extended what Biden did. So what you're left with then is interior deportations, and if you're not just going after hardened criminals, which require a lot of law enforcement power to identify. You're now going after people coming back from vacation or meatpacking plants or farms. This is
Precisely.
not what people signed up for by and large, not
No.
what people were expecting. And in a place like Florida, I think that creates a lot of political risk for Republicans.
Right.
Mhm.
And as with
Mhm.
tariffs, we're seeing a kind of backing off, right? I mean, these try to offer reassurances that he's not going after seasonal farm workers. He even made noises that sounded like he was interested in the guest worker program. So, he's going to try to give at the margins without giving up his overall toughness on this issue. But I think his bill is well documented in the Washington Monthly. He overstepped his bounds in the first term with kids in cages and other excesses. This time he seems really paused to do more of it. At the same time, Democrats don't have to, I think, go totally gooey. I think they can just say, look, we belatedly but tightened up the border, and we believe in an orderly process to become a citizen, and we do want to deport criminals. And I think that's a perfectly fine place for them to park.
Mhm. Matt, to that point, that formulation you just laid out, there was an article in the New York Times over the weekend exactly about Democrats' struggles over immigration policy. And Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona is quoted as arguing for a policy very similar to what you articulated, a secure border, the deportation of dangerous criminals, and a humane path to legal status for families already in the country is what the article said.
Yeah.
Bill, do you agree with that formulation as well? Do you think it's a winning combination?
Can you repeat that again?
Sure. Three-part plan that Gallego supports: a secure border, deportation of dangerous criminals, and a path to legal status for people who are already here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that's been the Democratic position for a long time. I don't think it's all that innovative. I mean, the thing that got everyone tripped up, and I think Politico just did a story about this. It was New York Times. There was that moment in the 2020 presidential debate where they asked, "Should we decriminalize border crossings?" And almost everybody raised their hand.
Right.
I think, if I remember, I think Biden did not. I think the one guy got the nomination did not.
Right.
So it's some bit overstated that the whole party
Yeah.
went this way. But that notion, it's a dumb question, because when you're talking about asylum, you're allowed to cross the border and say, "Hey, I request asylum," and then you're in the asylum process,
Right.
and then that gets adjudicated. So it's a trap of a question that's very easy to wriggle out of. And 90% of the presidential field at that point, the thought, well, I have to suck up to the most fringy of the activists and say this, even though it's obvious poison in the general election. But you have to go there to make the case about asylum. And we have learned since that if you do have a big influx on the border, I'm not blaming Biden for the influx, because the clear was pandemic driven and because of upheavals in other countries. It can put genuine pressure on municipalities. It makes this is the hard thing for people's brains to hold at the same time. You do want the people actually help you in the long run with your workforce, but on the front end, it's challenging to find the shelter, to get the work permits, to get people.
Right. If they're coming here by
schools.
illegally crossing the Rio Grande, that's not going to lead to their, diffusing throughout the country to meet labor needs. They're going to get bottlenecked at the border.
Right. So the
and create
key is
these problems.
orderly. So secure border certainly is one way to sort of convey, I want an orderly system. I don't think it has to be the dramatic crackdown on the border we have right now, but I understand the need to overcorrect after a big influx. But on the whole, you probably want more of a steady flow as opposed to zero flow.
Yeah.
So there's a way to talk about this that Democrats have talked about for a long time.
Yeah, I think there is a way they can modulate what this decade-old, more than decade-old now, position about path to citizenship, which is, it can be a path to residency, but do you really offer citizenship at the end? There's a good case that you should, but you may not have to. I think it is fair to ask, as some critics of the basic, bipartisan path to immigration, path to citizen consensus have said, which is, what signal does that send to you if you're in Tegucigalpa or wherever else? That if you get here and just hold out long enough, you can get citizenship. I think that's a fair question. I think on balance, you still want the immigrants, and even if it encourages some illegal border crossings, that's not a problem.
So we got to throw out one question about Elon Musk, who's back because now he's threatening a third party. He is upset by the big beautiful bill, and he has been at odds with the president on immigration. Uh, on a scale of 1 to 10, how successful is the America Party going to be? You guys think?
I think so go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think not very. I mean, I think it's I think I don't think sort of selling deficit reduction is a big sale right now, though it was in kind of Ross Perot's time. I think deficit reduction was a proxy for waste, and first, I don't think Musk has distinguished himself on that front. And second, people are going to go through a lot of domestic cuts anyway. So I'm not sure there's going to be great appetite for, really cutting Social Security and entitlements. I just think an austerity party is not going to be a successful party. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
I think there are different barometers of success. I mean, look, so, and I speak as a apologetic Ross Perot voter in 1992. I've written about that in the past. I hope people learn from my mistakes. I'm not. What I say is not to fawn all over Ross Perot all over again, but he did have a certain success. He did tap into a constituency. It wasn't consolidated in a state that would get you an electoral vote. It was spread kind of thinly across the country.
He was a success.
What's that?
I believe he was a big success.
Yeah,
with 19% of votes.
If he wasn't crazy, and he basically kind of went deeper into his nuttiness instead of building on his success afterwards. Like there was actually the ingredients for a sustained third-party movement there that he screwed up. And that's partly because it was kind of a cult of personality thing, and he didn't really build up a team. I mean, kind of almost did with Jesse Ventura. Like, and there was a moment there where like maybe you could have done that, but there were too many difficult personalities to make it work. So there's a lot of difficulties to make these things work, of course, and big egos are one of them. Ballot challenges are another. But Musk does have the resources, even more than Ross Perot ever did. And since he can't run himself for president, he could run for a lower office if he wanted to, but I don't think he does. There's more of a need for him to build up a team if it was going to actually become something. But that's all extremely easier said than done. I mean, so I don't mean to minimize the challenges here. He needs to have a distinct set of policies that has an actual constituency, and that's debatable because people who are disaffected by the two parties have all sorts of opinions. He's got to find a way to consolidate that. And he's got to find halfway decent candidates who don't seem like they're nut bars, right, and run them, and not just for president, but in a lot of down ballot races, and show you have a full crew of people. And even if you don't win a lot of races at first, if you can at least show you have a constituency and you're playing a spoiler role, that you can perhaps at least build on that over multiple cycles, but that requires lots of state commitment, which Elon Musk has never shown that he actually has.
Absolutely. And success is also measured by the degree to which you push the two mainstream parties in your direction, and you get policies out of them that you favor. So I think the 19% that Ross Perot got in 1992, the biggest third party performance in the 20th century, did do a lot to help push Clinton in the direction of more balanced budget and such. And it could possibly have that kind of effect on the parties now. You're certainly right that you'll have the resources.
Can debt be a constituency? And In 1992, it was.
No, I believe it was. I think things are different now for a bunch of reasons, but
I mean, but debt is very high, So
Yeah.
if you were to have a sort of cyclical moment for debt politics to have, again, not necessarily a majority constituency, but a niche constituency, it's not ludicrous.
No.
But Perot did something interesting in 1992, which is he actually put together a somewhat reasonable plan for deficit reduction. That was not just, I mean, he, for example, he was going to raise the gas tax. He didn't eschew tax increases. He was offering the tough medicine of spending cuts and tax increases that gave him a certain credibility, and belied his innate insanity, which
Right.
came through more clearly as things went on. If Musk put together like an actual program that economists said, what, this actually makes some sense over the long haul. It might be politically difficult, but it makes some sense. You could find that sort of constituency again.
Well, I mean, rehabilitating his reputation is going to be Musk's threshold obstacle, I think. Setting aside the inherent ridiculousness of a billionaire talking about deficit reduction, but he's dug himself a pretty big hole, as Matt pointed out, with Doge. And in 1992, also, you had deficit reduction coupled with welfare reform politics. And so there was this natural constituency kind of around that helps to enhance, I think, because of the just toxic politics around welfare. I'm not sure how that dynamic is going to play out in the years to come. It'll be very interesting to see, because there'll be more pressure to
Musk
spend.
has been, uber right wing as of late, and I think if he's running if he's trying to do an uber right wing party, he would probably, at best, he would split the Republicans,
Right.
but more likely he wouldn't be able to find that much daylight, because most Republicans are just hardcore MAGA. If you're going to beat up on the poor in your deficit reduction plan, I think you're limiting where that niche market might be. Perot had a shared sacrifice framework that wasn't just punching the poor. I don't remember off the top of my head if he was really hard on welfare. He talked more about entitlement reform and gas taxes. And
well, it's
like
waste, and there's a kind of the two parties that corrupt, and they're spending your money more than welfare. But you were dealing with more voters in play back then. There had not been this ossification of people picking their teams and not moving around so much. So he could benefit from what was a pretty strong collapse in George H.W. Bush's support, and that is where he got most of his people. I mean, there were there were Bill Scheers among them, but there were a lot of just disaffected all especially older folk and such. And
well, disaffection on both sides, where Perot pulled the Buchananites and the Songusites in 1992, which is a very weird coalition, because those are very different characters.
Right. And then walked himself down to 8% of the vote. 4 years later.
It became more Buchananite over time.
Exactly.
I guess if you're a very, very cynical Democratic operative, you would.
Oh yeah, it's a payday.
Exploit the.
We're paging Frank Luntz and Steve Schmidt. There's a history of a lot of these consultants going third party. All the Bloomberg acolytes who've been in his velvet cage for years. No, he'll find the consultants. I don't know about the voters.
So as always, what are you guys watching this week?
Well, Anne, I think as you've pointed out, our past sessions, this is July 9th coming up. What's he going to do about the Judgment Day? I'm going to continue to watch Zoran Mondani's, quest for the mayoralty in New York, and to see if the anti-Mondani forces can start to get some of the major candidates to drop off the ticket. I suspect they'll probably force Cuomo out. He doesn't seem to have the heart in it. But can they put enough together for the fall to really challenge the putative Democratic nominee? I don't think so. But so I'm going to be watching that.
I don't know if you talked about this before, but there's this rescissions package in the queue that legally has to be. So Donald Trump wants to essentially get Congress to cut funds that were previously appropriated for this fiscal year, and they have until July 18th to do that. And there's some discontent amongst Republicans about the whole package, so it's not clear whether they can get enough votes for it. Or if they got votes in the House and the Senate, if the bills would align, if they could get to conference fast enough. So I'll be watching to see how that comes together if it does. And it also has some bearing on the FY26 appropriations bills, which have to be passed in some form by September 30th to keep the government open. And a big question is whether they can keep the government open, because they can't reconciliation bill it. I don't believe this time around. They need Democrats to agree, and at least some Democrats on the Senate side, and that's easier said than done.
Wow. Okay. So much for a sleepy summer. Thanks so much, you guys, for joining us this morning. I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor of Washington Monthly, joined today by Bill Scher, politics editor, and Matt Cooper, executive editor of Digital. If you like what you heard today, please share, like, and subscribe. Find us online at WashingtonMonthly.com. Okay, have a great week, everyone.
Thanks. You too.